This story takes place in 1999, when I was a stupid 18-year-old kid with nothing better to do than cruise around at night. At the time, I lived in a very small town in Southern California, and the only places open after dark were the pharmacy, some fast food restaurants, and a super gross bar. So, like all kids, I made up my own entertainment. I spent a lot of time driving around with friends, listening to the radio and talking. It was better than sitting around our parents' houses, at least, I guess. But after one particularly terrifying encounter that summer, I was just fine from then on hanging out in our cozy, well-lit homes. One night, my friend Shauna and I decided to do our usual loop around the main part of town, out behind the high school, and back to our houses via the freeway. We'd been driving for about an hour, and it was close to 11 p.m., when we decided to do one last loop before calling it a night. Along the way, though, we noticed some guys in another car. I don't remember exactly how many there were, at least two, the driver and the passenger, but there may have been more. We first noticed them at a red light, stopped in the lane to our left. "Hey, that guy over there is checking you out," my friend said. I tried to play it cool and pretended like I was looking at the totally boring scenery. "Oh wow, an abandoned gas station. I just have to see this. Oops, caught your eye, tee-hee." Sure enough, the passenger of the car next to us was checking me out. I don't really remember what he looked like, but it was 1999 and this was a real white trash sort of town, so maybe a little bit like Fred Durst, perhaps? Anyway, I gave him a small smile, turned up our radio, and sped off as the light changed. The car stayed a normal distance behind us, and my friend kept looking over her shoulder, telling me to slow down so we could see if they were cute. I wasn't creeped out or anything. I just wasn't interested in playing flirt tag with some random dudes, so I maintained my pace. By the time we got to the next light, they'd gotten behind me and switched lanes, so they were pulled up to the right of our car. My friend immediately glanced over. The driver gave her the "what's up" nod, and I could see their passenger leaning forward to try and stare at us. Shauna gave them a little wave as the light changed, and we took off. A few blocks later, I pulled up to a stop sign where you could either go straight or turn right. The other car, who had been a couple car lengths behind us and to our left, sped up to catch up to us at the stop sign and jerked into the right-hand turn lane. They were slightly behind our car, but we could hear them shouting hello. My friend turned to look at the driver, who was leaning out his window, motioning for us to follow them. Nope, that wasn't gonna happen. Red light flirting was one thing, but neither of us were so desperate to meet boys that we'd follow them in our car late at night, especially when there was nowhere to even go. Instead, she waved goodbye and we drove off, heading to the freeway entrance. In my rear-view mirror, though, I saw their car flip around for wherever they had been originally heading and start to catch up with us instead. I got onto the freeway, hoping they wouldn't follow us, but of course they totally did. They steed a few car lengths behind us but kept switching lanes. Now if this happened today, I'd call highway patrol on my cell, but back then neither of us had one. At this point, I wasn't certain we were in danger, but I knew something was off. Their car continued to switch lanes behind us for a couple miles, but didn't try to catch up. Eventually, I hit the part of the freeway that was a bit more populated, and I started to calm down a bit. "Oh, well, you know, they're probably heading downtown or maybe to the beach. I bet they just wanted to try and talk to us," we thought to ourselves. We cranked up the radio and decided to drive a little further, and thought we'd lost the car. But we were wrong. About 15 minutes later, we exited the freeway and turned around to start to head home. I'd been driving for a couple of minutes when I saw a car suddenly pull off the shoulder of the road and start following us. At first, I thought it was just a speed trap, but I instantly saw it was the same car from earlier. They'd been waiting for us on the side of the road. They caught up to my car on the passenger side, and in my peripheral vision, I could see the driver gesturing angrily to us. Neither of us could tell what he was saying, but Shauna started shouting back. I don't know, I'm sorry." I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but I was also like, holy fuck, what's going on? I kept glancing over. Then it happened. The driver pulled a gun out of his lap and tapped it on the inside of his car window at us. Shauna immediately threw her seat back. Which, like, yeah, save yourself, but also thanks for giving them a clear shot right at me. I looked over and saw the driver's face, which was absolutely furiously contorted with rage. He was shouting so hard I could see spit flying all over the window, which he was still tapping the gun against. I don't exactly remember what kind of gun it was, but it was quite dangerous looking. I began reviewing a mental map of the area, trying to figure out the easiest way to get to a police station. We were about 6 exits from where we started, and I knew there was a fire station pretty close to there, so I decided to floor it and try to outrun them. I quickly gained distance and pulled into their lane, which was the fast lane and closest to the exits. They were driving some kind of Toyota sedan, and I was in a Honda with a lot of pickup, so I managed to clear out pretty fast. They still caught up though. They pulled into the lane to my right, and I could see the driver now waving his gun arm outside the window. The passenger was flipping us off outside his, and then they pulled what looked like a crowbar, waving it out the window like a fucking war boy, looking for victory on Fury Road. I'm getting off at the next exit and going to the fire station, I told Shauna. They're basically cops, right? Or at least they can call the cops. I'm sure it'll be fine. I reached over to grab her hand. She was still lying flat, but she was shaking and crying. Today, 20 years later, I'm the mom of a toddler, and I still never felt the intense pressure of responsibility I felt in that moment. I had to keep us calm and safe, and get us away from these guys. The next exit was fast approaching, and they hadn't quite caught up yet or moved into our lane. I quickly exited the freeway, heard them pass, and immediately gunned our car in the direction of the fire station, hoping beyond all hope that somehow the firemen were having a midnight party with armed police invited. I hadn't gone very far, though, when I saw the car tearing ass to catch up with us. All I could think was that they flipped a U-turn on the freeway and drove the wrong way to double back to the exit. Nothing else made geographic sense. I ran a red light even, hoping to God a hidden cop would suddenly pull me over, but no such luck that night. They were about a block or so behind us. With one eye on my rearview mirror, I drove as quickly as I could, hoping they were done trying to scare us and would fall back. Instead, though, by the grace of God or karma or whatever you believe, their car suddenly hit some kind of debris on the road and lost control because they crashed into a mailbox on the sidewalk and immediately stopped. I saw the driver get out as I was peeling away, and I swear to God I almost peed myself from relief and gratitude. Now before you comment that the gun was probably fake, let me tell you the last part of this story. As we were driving off, we heard them start shooting from their direction. I didn't look back, but Shauna sat up to look and said she saw the driver standing in front of the car, aiming his gun in our direction. I quickly turned the direction of the fire station, and we heard another shot ring out. I got to the fire station finally, and for the second time that night, I felt like some divine presence was watching over us. Turned out there were in fact 3 police cruisers outside with cops standing around talking to the firemen. Told you it was a small town. I pulled over, told them my story, and embarrassingly vomited from fear halfway through. The cops were very nice though, and immediately went to chase after them. One stayed behind to get our full statements, and made sure we were okay. I'll never ever forget what she said to me. You must have done some fine outrunning tonight. I'm glad you finished the race in one piece. Here's what I know. They did not catch the guys that night, and if they ever did, I never found out about it. Second, they were driving a stolen car with stolen plates. We gave our statements, and I kept an eye on the news for the next few months, but I never saw or heard about any similar reports. 20 years later, though, Shauna and I are still good friends, and often reminisce about that night together. Neither of us really has any theories as to what their intent was, but we know for sure it was definitely not good. Up until junior year of high school, I flew mostly under the social radar and stuck to my status as a nerd girl. When I was 15, though, I joined varsity cheer. My school's cheerleaders weren't popular by definition, but everyone kinda knew who we were. We were on the announcements, performed at pep rallies, and generally had a lot of engagement with the student body. I made a lot of friends that year, and some of them happened to be the cool kids. For a while, I thought this was my long-awaited karma payoff for the years of bullying I'd suffered at their hands. I even developed a crush on one of them. A crush which the junior cheer captain herself volunteered to help me pursue. Homecoming is a very big deal where I'm from, and I began to fantasize about my crush asking me to go with him. I'd heard rumors he was planning this dramatic proposal, and as homecoming season approached, I became more and more sure I would be his date. The junior cheer captain, who was very close with him, also kept dropping hints that I was right. One day at practice, she asked me what my favorite candy was, and I just knew it would be so my crush would know what to give me. You can imagine my surprise when, after an exhausting theater rehearsal, I walked into the parking lot and was confronted by a guy I'd hardly ever spoken to, asking me to be his date. My theater friends all applauded, assuming I was overjoyed. I saw both my parents in the parking lot even, recording the whole surprise. But most importantly, the cool kids I'd recently befriended were all standing there right behind him, egging him on. I really didn't understand why, because he wasn't really popular at all. In fact, he was almost the opposite. He was known to be kind of creepy. The junior cheer captain was laughing, encouraging him to give me the box of my favorite candy he was holding. It seemed she definitely orchestrated the entire thing. I didn't really know the guy that well, but I didn't want to humiliate him in front of the coolest kids in school, so I faked a smile and kinda rolled with it. I promised myself I'd deny him purposefully later in private, so he wouldn't be embarrassed in front of everyone. Afterwards, when my parents excitedly asked me how I felt about the entire ordeal, I explained how deeply uncomfortable it made me. The entire time I got these strong, creepy vibes from that guy. That didn't fly with my parents. My mother accused me of having my expectations set too high, and my father demanded to know, not for the first time, if I was secretly a lesbian. To make his case even stronger in his mind, I'd just become friends with the only openly gay girl our school had ever seen. Long story short, I knew that if I shut down my date, I'd effectively declare war on my parents. However, I played my dad's protective instinct against him and persuaded him to let me friend-zone my date. After all, he must know how high school boys think, right? I texted my date that night and explained that I only saw us as friends, but I would still be happy to go to homecoming with him platonically. He was very polite about it, actually, although I could tell that he was interested in me romantically. It seemed we'd reached a fair deal, until the next day at school, when one of my cheerleader friends referred to my date as my boyfriend. I corrected her and told her we were just going to homecoming as friends. She seemed confused, though, and told me my date was telling everyone who could listen that I was now his girlfriend. A few more of my friends approached me with similar comments and concerns, and I confronted my date about them. He denied all involvement, though, and suggested it was just a random rumor that had started. I reminded him that we were just friends, and I had zero romantic interest in him. He said he understood. Then I got a call from the junior cheer captain. She pretended to be sweet and conspiratorial, but I was still very annoyed that she'd led me to believe my crush would ask me to homecoming. She began her attempt to persuade me that I was wrong to friend-zone my date. Told me she'd spent many afternoons planning this proposal with him, and she knew he was kinda creepy when seen from afar, but was actually sweet and caring underneath all that veneer. I just told her if he was such a catch, then she should date him instead. Annoyed, she immediately dropped the act. She told him I had to date him, because he liked me so much, and he'd gone through so much trouble to ask me. I had to give him a chance because he'd gone out on such a limb for me. Of course, I told her she was wrong. I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to, and I owed this guy nothing. I ended up hanging up on her soon after that, but that was only the beginning of these events. Starting the next Monday, he would corner me in the hallway and give me a rose he held in his teeth. He usually did so between my 6th and 7th periods, when my path through the hall had to cross by his. I was deeply uncomfortable with this display and told him so, but he just wouldn't stop. I tried to take different routes to escape him, but the junior cheer captain and her posse made it a point of tracking me down so he could find me everywhere. Every time he did this, everyone in the area would treat it as a sweet romantic gesture, despite my visually obvious discomfort. After all, wouldn't any girl be so lucky to have a boy so devoted to her that he gave her a rose every day? He even started telling everyone I was his girlfriend again. The final straw for me, though, was when he walked into a class he wasn't in to find me and give me that daily rose. My teacher, who was friends with the junior cheer captain, just let this happen. For weeks after, she would bother me about him every day, too. When he came in, I told him to get out and leave me alone. His feelings were clearly hurt, and he left looking like a kicked puppy. My classmates turned immediately and started calling me a cold, hard bitch. It didn't matter what I had to say about him. I was an ice queen refusing this sweet boy's advances. Everyone in the school had decided on their own that I was in love with him, and nobody cared what I had to say about it. My crush, who was a part of the popular group, joined the junior cheer captain in pressuring me to return my date's feelings. At pretty much every event where the cheerleaders were present, my date would push his way to the front of the crowd. He would go to very great lengths to get my attention. At football games, he would wave a flag in the student section, so I'd look at him when we were cheering. The other girls would make comments on how endearing he was when he waited in the parking lot by our bus, back to the school, just to hug me and tell me how great I did. I didn't really know how to settle this situation other than by just letting it happen. I had only recently ascended to the position of visibility. If I conflicted too hard with all the cool kids who were so dead set on setting me up with this guy, I'd be an outsider all over again. I hoped that if I just kept ranting to my real friends about how creepy he was and publicly let him do what he wanted, it would all just blow over eventually. My school had a 15-second attention span, so some scandal was bound to one-up me sooner or later. The truth emerged, as usual, in the locker room. It turns out the junior cheer captain had been telling him during their afternoons together that I was so into him. He'd come to her for help announcing his crush to me, and she'd gone a step further and manipulated him into thinking I felt the same, despite the fact that even up until this point I didn't even know his name. She lied to him for weeks prior to the proposal, and when I told her that was wrong, she didn't care. She told me I should be grateful, because everyone was starting to think that I was gay. My best friend and I, inspired, spread a rumor that we were dating. After all, everybody already thought I was gay, right? But my date wasn't even fazed by this. In fact, he told everyone he'd turn me straight once again. Ew. Well, 3 weeks after he had asked me, it was finally homecoming night. Thanks to cheer obligations and a complete coincidence involving a switched backpack that left me without my dress, I ended up only attending the dance for about half an hour. My date awkwardly stood on the side of the room while I danced my heart out to Mr. Brightside. I almost felt bad for him when, right at the end, the junior captain appeared like a summoned demon to suggest we slow dance at the next opportunity. I escaped that one by walking straight up to the DJ and suggesting he play Footloose instead. My date walked me out to the parking lot to wait for my mom to pick me up. While we waited for her to come around, which took entirely too long because she still hoped I'd stop making a fuss and date him, he asked me out. I politely declined. He quickly stammered that we could go with a group of people, like the junior cheer captain and my crush. I denied him again and made it clear we were only friends, and I wasn't interested in any romantic endeavors because I was just too busy. That was actually true, in fact. I was in all advanced classes, varsity theater, cheer, I even worked part-time too. Well, a few days later, a teacher eloped to Vegas, and suddenly nobody cared about my love life anymore. My date and I were distanced again by classes and activities and work. It appeared that everything was starting to go back to normal. That Friday at the football game, my crush asked me to sit on his shoulders for the alma mater, kind of a romantic thing at my school. Overjoyed, I accepted, and hoped this was the beginning of a new chapter in my high school life. I ignored those frantically waving flags in the stands. Monday, my date stood on a chair in his second period class and announced that everyone should be wary of my crush because he would steal your girl. I heard everyone buzzing about it a few hours later, when someone called me a bitch again for breaking my date's heart. I knew I was being dramatic, but I decided not to go to lunch that day, terrified of running into him. I'm so glad I didn't. Later, I saw on Snapchat that my date had carved my name into his arm with a pair of scissors. His bleeding arm was screenshotted and sent to me by a half-dozen people, most of them demanding to know why I'd hurt him like this. He did it in the middle of lunch in a crowded cafeteria, and somehow the administration neither cared nor noticed. The entire school was buzzing. My date was this broken-hearted victim, and I was the evil, secretly gay bitch who wouldn't give him a chance. I got all these dirty looks. By fifth period, I was ready to just walk out, but my good girl instincts kicked in, and I decided I could tough it out for at least 2 more hours. Around that time, I got a panicked text from one of my cheer friends. While she'd initially been insistent that I date that creepy guy, she'd apparently changed her mind after the lunch incident earlier. She told me that my date, who was in her 5th period class, was now going off the rails. He started saying he wanted to kill himself because I wouldn't love him. This escalated into saying he'd kill my crush for lying to me and stealing me away. Finally, he started ranting about how he knew where I lived. My parents had given him my address when he initially wanted to ask me to the dance at my house. Said he would make me pay for wronging him. I knew that after 6th period, our paths through the hall would cross once again. Since the beginning of this ordeal, the school had cracked down on students getting outside, and my alternate route to escape him was no longer an option. My class was at the far end of the hall, with nowhere to go but into the central hub, and he would be coming from the other end of the hallway towards mine. I was stuck up a chimney, basically. Desperate, I texted the junior cheer captain to finish what she started and tell him that I was not and had never been interested in him. She'd made this mess, and I would make sure she would clean it up no matter what. But she didn't know what to do. This was already way beyond her control now. For the first and only time in my life, I skipped a class. I hid out in the theater hall and waited for 7th period. I got a few texts during the passing period that my date was waiting for me by the bathrooms the entire time. There was a little alcove right there where you can't see people coming around the corner. The thought of him just waiting and hiding there in that cubbyhole, trying to catch me walking by, terrified me. Right before 7th period began, a few of my classmates burst in cackling and proclaimed that my date was now on his way to kill my school crush. They thought this was hilarious, but judging by the look on my crush's face, well, suddenly this wasn't a joke to him anymore. Our teacher brushed this off as typical theater drama. Pun fully intended. I watched the clock and tried not to cry, knowing that by the time the bell rang, my date would be outside, waiting for me and my crush to emerge. That day ended up being a work day, so my crush and I were able to escape the classroom and hide out elsewhere in the theater hall to get away from him. He opted for the black box theater, and I went for the lighting closet. Because of this, I didn't directly witness what happened next, but my friend filled me in afterwards. Allegedly, my date had turned up 3 minutes before the bell rang and stood outside the classroom where we couldn't see him when we opened the door. He told everyone standing around that he was ready to have a knife fight with my crush. We don't know if he actually had a knife on him, but the idea that he would do that was enough to terrify me. His arm was wrapped in paper towels and he was bleeding profusely. My best friend told him my crush and I were gone, but he wouldn't believe her. He stood outside for 25 minutes, until finally the administrators began walking through to make sure no one was in the school who shouldn't be. My date wasn't in theater, so he wasn't allowed to stick around. That night I texted him that not only would I never date him, I could no longer even see a friendship between us. I sent him a number to a suicide hotline and told him he had to get help. And finally, I told him he needed to understand what no meant, and I never wanted to speak to him again. He responded that he was sorry and asked if there was anything he could do to fix this. I told him no. You know, I don't think he really learned the meaning of the word after all, though. because the same pattern repeated itself a few months later on Valentine's Day, the next year at homecoming, senior year, Valentine's Day, even prom. But those are all other disturbing stories. I've since graduated and gone off to college hundreds of miles away from him. My family back home moved from the address my parents had given him. Contrary to popular belief, I am not gay. My crush, on the other hand, came out a few months later, and we were friends for the rest of high school. I'm doing my best at working on handling romantic endeavors in a healthy way, but that guy really got into my head. He was the first person to ever show interest in me, you know? Ironically, the last time I saw him was my first and only homecoming game after graduating, but this time I had true friends to defend me when he predictably tried to pull some creepy weird stuff with me. The worst part looking back was somehow being at fault for everything. To this day, people from my high school reference the whole ordeal as that time you wouldn't date that poor, shy kid. Can't even appreciate red roses anymore. I was 23 when I started working full-time at everyone's favorite supermarket. I had struggled over 3 years of college before deciding to get a full-time job. I had worked a trial full-time job for 6 months before becoming a greeter, a year before it was changed into something more serious. I look younger than I am, and people have asked if I was still in high school, or even if I had a boyfriend. I got it enough to get used to those kind of questions under a work environment. I also have anxiety, so I worried about customer service more than my own comfort zone most of the time in that position. I soon, though, started to keep work journals detailing what I saw on a daily basis, or anything I found suspicious, which came in quite handy for me, in my opinion. There was this older gentleman that needed to use an electric cart to get around in EFS that I helped from time to time. Normally, I watched the secondary doors. He introduced himself as Al, claimed to be in his 70s, and required the electric cart because of all the smoking he'd done in his younger years. Al normally would strike up long conversations about his life after he was done shopping. He would stay at least another 5 or so minutes before leaving, including asking if I had a boyfriend, and at one time making up scenarios of meeting such a person. As I stated before, I was used to hearing this boyfriend question so much that I just stuck with an automatic saying. I don't have a boyfriend and I'm not looking to find one anytime soon. Al took this as me lying to get out of the situation, when in fact I was telling the truth. I also overlooked a lot of what he said, most of the time, because it was normally loud when these conversations happened, and he had quite a rasp to his voice. Proof of all the smoking he'd told me. I thought it was all just stuff that was the norm from his time, you know? As a retail worker, I also felt it would have been rude if I ignored him. I guess, though, it gave Al a reason to think that I was his friend. I didn't start seeing red flags about his behavior until late November 2018, when he told me I looked pretty, and that he would imagine me naked. It made me uncomfortable, but I awkwardly thanked him for the compliment, and he went about his shopping before I documented it down. Red flag number 2 came a month later, the day after Christmas, and some time after my birthday. Earlier that day, I was talking to fellow greeter Tom, a male in his 50s, about when greeter Queenie would let us go on our breaks after a Mountain Dew spill. At this point, Al came in to do his shopping. After he was done, I was helping him transfer groceries to a pushcart. He said he's seen me talking to Tom in a monotone-sounding voice, and left without going into any conversation. That was a bit scary for me, the sudden change in personality. Red flag number 3 came not even a week into the new year. Al came back to do some shopping, and tried to strike up a conversation with me after he was done. He noticed, though, that I was trying to focus on my job more than him. This prompted him to ask if he made me uncomfortable. I told him I didn't want to be rude, as I thought telling him would make him upset at the time. Al told me he saw me as a close friend, and that whenever he came in, he looked to see if I was working. Apparently, I was the friendliest greeter compared to everyone else before he left. I could tell he wanted to put me at ease, I guess, but it did the opposite. as I'd suddenly found I was right to be paranoid about him. I started to actively avoid Al if I saw him again, and was alone at either door, acting like I was busy and having an assistant manager switch me and Queenie to different doors whenever the two of us worked alone in the morning. It worked for about a month, until greeter Nora came and gave Queenie her breaks when she wanted them. Come February, I'm gathering baskets when I spot Al at the register that sells tobacco. He says hi to me, but I ignored him and hurried away. I later asked one of my managers to use the restroom and hid there until I couldn't hear him anymore. Self-checkout host Dory had noticed how uncomfortable I was, as Al recounted that he thought he might have insulted me when he asked if I had a boyfriend. He then told her everything he had been saying to me, and Dory understood right away why I was so uncomfortable. She later told me that Al was very vocally complaining about me ignoring him until he left. I told two other coworkers as I was trying to catch up in my journaling. I had fallen quite behind in it. They told me to escalate the situation to the head of loss prevention, Rebecca. I eventually did once I had 3 entries written down and marked as evidence. I told Rebecca what I'd been doing to avoid Al. I was quite afraid to tell anyone in management without any evidence, as I was worried I'd be brushed off as an anxious worker. Thankfully, she took me seriously though, and said I was doing the right thing by avoiding him. Since my journaling included times and dates, I was able to give Rebecca the time frame Al was most commonly coming into shop, sometime between 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., closer to the end of the month and mainly on Sundays. With that in mind, I was told to keep an eye out whenever Al came back in, and to point him out to her or her team, as his actions could lead to sexual harassment of customers as well. Come March, I was quite surprised to see Al come in at a later time and act more professional around me, keeping things to a curt hello and goodbye instead of trying to make conversation. Even with the change of attitude though, I still kept my guard up. Near the end of the month, around 6:50 at night, Al stated how nice the weather was and asked me if I could help him out to his car with his groceries so I could take the electric cart back inside. It's EFS's policy that the electric carts stay inside at all times to avoid any damage to them, unless the customer physically can't get to the store without heavy assistance. I politely said he had to use a push cart, as the electric cart can't go outside. I'd get one for him. He was a bit insistent in taking the electric cart out, and was halfway through the entryway. I pushed the cart close to the electric cart and politely insisted that the cart stay inside to avoid getting damage from pebbles and dust that could get into the electronics. Al relented at that reason, had his groceries put into the push cart, and left shortly thereafter. I was relieved that the situation wasn't escalated so that I had to step outside to help him, but I did take note of his car, should he get an idea to try and follow me home. It was also the only time he ever asked me to come outside with him. Eventually I told Nora I didn't feel comfortable around him at all. He said I wasn't the only young woman he had said these things to. He said these things like this to other female workers at other EFSs, since Nora had transferred over from the west location in the city. A little over halfway into April, I switched over to cashiering and put more information about Al's visits so I could try to avoid serving him by myself. Coming in around the time food stamps were replenished and within 7 to 10 days at the end of the month, mainly Sundays and Fridays. Luckily enough though, I didn't see him much after the switch. Even more coincidentally, at the start of May, I found an online article by the local newspaper with a picture of a guy who looked suspiciously like Al in my Twitter timeline. I didn't want to get my assumptions up though, so I had Nora look at the picture to confirm 2 days later. To my shock, she confirmed it immediately. Reading the article revealed that Al had spilled gravy on his laptop and taken it into Popular Electronics to get the files recovered. The IT, of course, found illicit pictures of children during the recovery and called police. Al admitted to saving the photos and was able to describe what he'd saved. He was arrested right away. The article also revealed that Al wasn't even his real name. He was actually in his mid-50s and was from a nearby city in Iowa, which explained why he only came in on the weekends. I told everyone that knew the story, and they were equally shocked but also relieved. I did research on his state laws on the charges against Al a few days after his scheduled court appearance. I found that he was guaranteed at least 2 to 10 years in prison. and an immediate registration as a sex offender. In October, I decided to do more research, as it had been months and I'd found more articles confirming that he'd copped a plea deal for 2 years. I had switched to another position on the sales floor by the time I found out about the sentencing. It's been over 2 years since then. I have my old coworkers and Rebecca to thank for giving me the thought and confidence to tell the customer no if I didn't feel something was right. I can't help but think about how badly things might have gotten if I had gone to help him out in his car, and if he'd had any other intentions in mind. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the content of this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide you like my content enough to subscribe, please be sure to hit the bell button right next to the subscribe button and turn notifications to all so you can be notified of every video I post in the future. If you don't feel like doing that though, I post a video nearly every day, so you can just come back every now and then and check up on what you missed. If you guys have any criticisms on what I can do better or any feedback on the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I always enjoy reading all the comments and I try to give them hearts and respond when I can. If you guys would like to reach me for any reason, or you would like to send in a story to be read, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. You'll find a link to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, I also run 2 other channels, Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, where I do true crime videos and dark documentaries respectively. If that kind of content sounds interesting to you, why not go ahead and check it out and see if it is for you. Aside from that though, guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.